This is kind of what empathy is and open-mindedness is try to consider that the set of concepts that your brain has constructed through which you're now perceiving the world is not painting the full picture. I mean, this is now true for basically every, it doesn't have to be men and women. It could be basically
Well,
the prism through which we perceive actually the political discourse, right?
absolutely. So here's what I would say. Um, the there are scientists who will talk to you about cognitive empathy and emotional empathy, and I I prefer to think of it. I think the evidence is more consistent with what I'm about to say, which is that your brain is always making predictions using your own past experience and what you've learned from books and movies and other people telling you about their experiences and so on. And if your brain cannot make a concept to make sense of those, anticipate what those sense data are and make sense of them, you will be experientially blind. So, when I'm giving lectures to people, I'll show them like a blobby black and white image, and they're experientially blind to the image. They can't see anything in it. And then I show them a photograph, and then I show them the image again, the blobby image, and then they see actually an object in it. But
That's
but
awesome.
the image is the same.
Yeah.
It's they're actually adding, their predictions now are
Yep.
adding, right? Or
It's a beautiful
anyone
example.
anybody who's learned a language, a second language after their first language, also has this experience of things that initially sound like sounds that they can't quite make sense of eventually come to make sense of them. And in fact, there are really cool examples of people who were like born blind because they have cataracts, or they have corneal damage so that no light is reaching the brain. And then they have an operation, and then light reaches the brain, and they can't see for days and weeks and sometimes years. They are experientially blind to certain things. So what happens with empathy, right, is that your brain is making a prediction. And if it doesn't have the capacity to make, if you don't share, if you're not similar, remember, categories are instances which are similar in some way. If you are not similar enough to that person, you will have a hard time making a prediction about what they feel. You will be experientially blind to what they feel. In the United States, children of color are under-prescribed medicine by their physicians. This has been documented. It's not that the physicians are racist necessarily, but they might be experientially blind. The same thing is true of male physicians with female patients. I could tell you some hair-raising stories, really, that where people die as a consequence of a physician making the wrong inference, the wrong prediction, because of being experientially blind. So we are, empathy is not, it's not magic. We make inferences about each other, about what each other's feeling and thinking. In this culture, there are some cultures where, people have what's called opacity of mind, where they will make a prediction about someone else's actions, but they're not inferring anything about the internal state of that person. But in our culture, we're constantly making inferences. What is this person thinking? And we're not doing it necessarily consciously, but we're just doing it really automatically using our predictions, what we know. And if you expose yourself to information which is very different from somebody else, really what we have is we have different cultures in this country right now there are a number of reasons for this. Part of it is, I don't know if you saw the Social Dilemma, the Netflix.
Heard about it.
Yeah, it's it's really great documentary. And
About what social networks are doing to our society, or is
yeah,
that,
yeah.
yeah.
But no phenomenon has a simple single cause. There are multiple small causes which all add up to a perfect storm. That's just, how most things work. And so the fact that machine learning algorithms are serving people up information on social media that is consistent with what they've already viewed and making, is part of the reason that you have these silos, but it's not the only reason why you have these silos. I think there are other things afoot that enhance people's inability to even have a decent conversation.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so many things you said are just brilliant. So the experiential blindness, but also from my perspective, like I preach and I try to practice empathy a lot. And something about the way you've explained it makes me almost see it as a kind of exercise that we should all do, like to train, like to add experiences to the brain to expand its capacity to predict more effectively.
Absolutely.
So what I do is kind of like a method acting thing, which is I imagine what the life of a person is like, you know, just think. I mean, this is something you see with Black Lives Matter and police officers. It feels like they're both, not both, but I have, because of martial arts and so on, I have a lot of friends who are cops. They don't necessarily have empathy or visualize the experience of the other. Certainly, currently, unfortunately, people aren't doing that with police officers. They're not imagining, they're not empathizing or putting themselves in the shoes of a police officer to realize how difficult that job is, how dangerous it is, how difficult it is to maintain calm and under so much uncertainty, all those kinds of things.
But there's more, that's true, but I think that there's even more to be said there. I mean, like from a predicting brain standpoint, there's even more that can be said there. So I don't know if you want to go down that path or you
Yeah,
want to
let's
stick
try.
on empathy, but I will also say that one of the things that I was most gratified by, I still am receiving, it's been more than 3.5 years since How Emotions Are Made came out, and I'm still receiving daily emails from people, right? So that's gratifying. But one of the most gratifying emails I received was from a police officer in Texas who told me that he thought that How Emotions Are Made contained information that would be really helpful to resolving some of these difficulties. And he hadn't even read my op-ed piece about when is a gun not a gun, and like using what we know about the science of perception from a prediction standpoint, like the brain is a predictor, to understand a little differently what might be happening in these circumstances. So there's a real, it's hard to talk about because everyone gets mad at you when you talk about this, and there is a way to understand this which has profound empathy for the suffering of people of color, and that definitely is in line with Black Lives Matter, at the same time as understanding the really difficult situation that police officers find themselves in. And I'm not talking about this bad apple or that bad apple. I'm not talking about police officers who are necessarily shooting people in the back as they run away. I'm talking about the cases of really good, well-meaning cops who have the kind of predicting brain that everybody else has. They're in a really difficult situation that I think both they and the people who are harmed don't realize. Like the way that these situations are constructed, I think it's just, there's a lot to be said there, I guess, is
Yeah.
what I want to
Is there
say.
something we can try to say in a sense, like what I'm, from the perspective of the predictive brain, which is a fascinating perspective to take on this. all the protests that are going on, there seems to be a concept of a police officer being built.
No, I think that concept is there.
But it's gaining strength. So it's being I mean,
Yeah, it is.
sure,
Yeah,
it
for
is there.
sure. But I think, yeah, for sure. I think that that's right. I think that there's a shift in the stereotype of what I would say is a stereotype. There's a stereotype of black man in this country that's always in movies and television, not always, but like largely, um, that many people watch. I mean,
But
you think you're watching a 10 o'clock drama and all you're doing is like kicking back and relaxing, but actually you're having certain predictions reinforced and others not. And
that's fascinating. Yeah.
what's happening now with police is the same thing. That there are certain stereotypes of a police officer that are being abandoned and other stereotypes that are being reinforced by what you see happening. All I'll say is that if you remember, I mean, there's a lot to say about this, really, that, regardless of whether it makes people mad or not. I mean, the science is what it is.
Yeah.
Just remember what I said. The brain makes predictions about internal changes in the body first, and then it starts to prepare motor action. And then it makes a prediction about what you will see and hear and feel based on those actions. Okay? So it's also the case that we didn't talk about is that sensory sampling, like your brain's ability to sample what's out there, is yoked to your heart rate. It's yoked to your heartbeats. There are certain phases of the heartbeat where it's easier for you to see what's happening in the world than at others. And so if your heart rate goes through the roof, you will be more likely to just go with your prediction and not correct based on what's out there, because you're actually literally not seeing as well. Or you will see things that aren't there, basically.
Is there something that we could say by way of advice for when this episode is released in the chaos of emotion? Sorry, I don't know a better term. That's just flying around on social media. What's
Well, I actually think it is emotion in the following sense. And it sounds a little bit like artificial in the way that I'm about to say it, but I really think that this is what's happening. One thing we haven't talked about is, brains didn't evolve for you to see, they didn't evolve for you to hear, they didn't evolve for you to feel, they evolved to control your body. That's why you have a brain. You have a brain so that it can control your body. And the metaphor, there's the scientific term for predictively controlling your body is allostasis. Your brain is attempting to anticipate the needs of your body and meet those needs before they arise so that you can act as you need to act. And the metaphor that I use is a body budget. Your brain is running a budget for your body. It's not budgeting money, it's budgeting glucose and salt and water. And instead of having, one or two bank accounts, it has gazillions. There are all these systems in your body that have to be kept in balance. And it's monitoring very closely. It's making predictions about, like, when is it good to spend and when is it good to save and what would be a good investment and am I going to get a return on my investment? Whenever people talk about reward or reward prediction error or anything to do with reward or punishment, they're talking about the body budget. They're talking about your brain's predictions about whether or not there will be a deposit or withdrawal. So when your brain is running a deficit in your body budgets, you have some kind of metabolic imbalance, you experience that as discomfort. You experience that as distress. When things are chaotic, you can't predict what's going to happen next. So I have this absolutely brilliant scientist working in my lab. His name is Jordan Terrio, and he's published this really terrific paper on a sense of should. Like, why do we have social rules? Why do we, adhere to social norms? It's because if I make myself predictable to you, then you are predictable to me. And if you're predictable to me, that's good because that is less metabolically expensive for me. Novelty or unpredictability at the extreme is expensive. And if it goes on for long enough, what happens is, first of all, you will feel really jittery and antsy, which we describe as anxiety. Mm-hmm. It isn't necessarily anxiety. It could be just something is not predictable and you are experiencing arousal because the chemicals that help you learn increase your feeling of arousal, basically. Mm-hmm. But if it goes on for long enough, you will become depleted. And you will start to feel really, really, really distressed. So what we have is a culture full of people right now who their body budgets are just decimated.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. When you talk about it as depression and anxiety, it makes you think that it's not about your metabolism, that it's not about your body budgeting, that it's not about getting enough sleep or about eating well or about making sure that you have social connections. You think that it's something separate from that. But depression and anxiety are just a way of being in the world. They're a way of being in the world when things aren't quite right with your predictions.
That's such a deep way of thinking. Like the brain is maintaining homeostasis.
It's actually allostasis.
Allostasis, I'm sorry. And it's constantly making predictions, and metabolically speaking, it's very costly to make novel, like constantly be learning to making adjustments. And then over time, there's cost to be paid if you're just in a place of chaos where there's constant need for adjusting and learning and experience novel things.
And so part of the problem here, there are a couple of things. Like I said, it's a perfect storm. There isn't a single cause.
Right.
There are multiple causes, multiple things that combine together. It's a complex system, multiple things. Part of it is that people they're metabolically encumbered and they're distressed. And in order to try to have empathy for someone who is very much unlike you, you have to forage for information. You have to explore information that is novel to you and unexpected. And that's expensive. And at a time when people feel, what do you do when you are running a deficit in your bank account? You stop spending. What does it mean for a brain to stop spending? A brain stops moving very much, stops moving the body, and it stops learning. It just goes with its internal model.
Brilliantly put, yep.
So empathy requires, to have empathy for someone who is unlike you, requires learning and practice. You're foraging for information. I mean, it is something I talk about in the book, in 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. I think it's really important. It's hard, but it's hard. I think it's, it's hard for people to be curious about views that are unlike their own when they feel so encumbered. And I'll just tell you, I had this epiphany, really. I was listening to Robert Reich's The System. He was talking about oligarchy versus democracy. And so oligarchy is where very wealthy people, like extremely wealthy people, shift power so that they become even more wealthy and even more insulated and from the pressures of the common person. It's actually the kind of system that leads to the collapse of civilizations, if you believe Jared Diamond. Mm-hmm. Just say that. But anyways, I'm listening to this, and I'm listening to him describe in fairly decent detail how the CEOs of these companies, there's been a shift in what it means to be a CEO and no longer being a steward of the community and so on. But like in the 1980s, it sort of shifted to this other model of being like an oligarch. And he's talking about how, it used to be the case that that CEOs made like 20 times what their employees made. And now they make about 300 times on average what their employees made. So where did that money come from? It came from the pockets of the employees. And they don't know about it, right? No one knows about it. They just know they can't feed their children. They can't pay for healthcare. They can't take care of their family. And they worry about what's going to happen to they're living like, month to month, basically. Any one big bill could completely, put them out on the street. So there are a huge number of people living like this. So what they're experiencing, they don't know why they're experiencing it. So and then someone comes along and gives them a narrative.
Yeah.
Well, somebody else butted in line in front of you. And that's why you're this way. That's why you experience what you're experiencing. And just for a minute, I was thinking, I had deep empathy for people who have beliefs that are really, really, really different from mine. But I was trying really hard to see it through their eyes.
Yeah.
And did it cost me something metabolically? I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure.
But you had something in the gas tank.
Well,
in order to allocate that. I mean, that's the question is like, where did you what resources did your brain draw on in order to actually make that effort?
Well, I'll tell you something, honestly, Lex. I don't have that much in the gas tank right now. Right? So I am surfing the stress that, stress is just, what is stress? Stress is your brain is preparing for a big metabolic outlay, and it just keeps preparing and preparing and preparing and preparing.
You as a professor, you as a human?
Both, right? For me, this is a moment of existential crisis as much as anybody else, democracy, all of these things. So in many of my roles, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I get up every morning and I exercise. I run, I row, I lift weights, right? You exercise in the middle of the day. Yeah. I saw your daily
I'm
thing.
Obsessed with it.
Yeah. I hate it, actually. Yeah. You love it, right?
No, I hate it.
I hate it, but I do it religiously.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's a really good investment. It's an expenditure that is a really good investment. And so when I was exercising, I was listening to the book. And when I realized the insights that I was sort of like playing around with, like, does this make sense? Does this make sense? I didn't immediately plunge into it. I basically wrote some stuff down. I set it aside. And then I did what I prepared myself to make an expenditure. I don't know what you do before you exercise. I always have a protein shake, because I need to fuel up before I make this really big expenditure. And so I did the same thing. I didn't have a protein drink, but I did the same thing. And fueling up can mean lots of different things. It can mean talking to a friend about it. It can mean, it can mean making sure you get a good night's sleep before you do it. It can mean lots of different things. But I guess I think we have to do these things.
I'm going to re-listen to this conversation several times. This is brilliant. But I do think about, I've encountered so many people that can't possibly imagine that a good human being can vote for Donald Trump. And I've also encountered people that can't imagine that an intelligent person can possibly vote for a Democrat. And I look at both these people, many of whom are friends, and let's just say after this conversation, I can see as they're predicting brains not willing to invest the resources to empathize with the other side. And I think you have to, in order to be able to see the obvious common humanity in us. I don't know what the system is that's creating this division. We can put it like you said, it's a perfect storm. It might be the social media. It might be, I don't know what the hell
I
it
think
is.
it's a bunch of things. I
Right?
think it's
It's just coming together.
there's an economic system which is disadvantaging
Yep.
large numbers of people. There's a use of social media. Like if I had to orchestrate or architect a system that would screw up a human body budget, it would be the one that we live in. We don't sleep enough. We eat pseudo food, basically. We are on social media too much, which is full of ambiguity, which is really hard for a human nervous system, right? Really, really hard. Like ambiguity with no context to predict in. I mean, it's like really. And then, there are the economic concerns that affect large swaths of people in this country. I mean, it's really, I'm not saying everything is reducible to metabolism. Not everything is reducible to metabolism, but if you combine all these things together,
It's helpful to think of it that way. Then somehow it's also somehow reduces the entirety of the human experience to the same kind of obvious logic. Like we should exercise every day in the same kind of way. We should empathize every day.
yeah. There are these really wonderful, wonderful programs for teens and sometimes also for parents of people who've lost children in wars and in conflicts, in political conflicts, where they go to a bucolic setting and they talk to each other about their experiences, and miraculous things happen. So um, uh, it's easy to. It's easy to sort of shrug this stuff off as kind of Pollyanna-ish, like what's this really going to do? But um, uh, you have to think about when my daughter went to college. I gave her advice. I said, try to be around people who let you be the kind of person you want to be. We're back to free will. You have a choice. You have a choice. It might seem like a really hard choice. It might seem like a unimaginably difficult choice. But you have a choice. Do you want to be somebody who is wrapped in fury and agony, or do you want to be somebody who extends a little empathy to somebody else, and in the process maybe learn something?
Yeah.
Curiosity is the thing that it protects you. Curiosity is the thing. It's curative curiosity.
On social media, the thing I recommend to people, at least that's the way I've been approaching social media. I don't. It doesn't need to be the common approach, but I basically give love to people who seem to also give love to others. So it's the same similar concept of surrounding by yourself by the people you want to become. And I ignore, sometimes block, but just ignore. I don't add aggression to people who are just constantly full of aggression and negativity and toxicity. There's a certain desire when somebody says something mean to say something to say why or try to alleviate the meanness and so on. But what you're doing essentially is you're now surrounding yourself by that group of folks that have that negativity. So even just the conversation. So I think it's just so powerful to put yourself amongst people who are whose basic mode of interaction is kindness. Because I don't know what it is, but maybe it's the way I'm built. Is that to me is energizing for the gas tank of that. Then I can pull to
For sure.
when I start reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and start thinking about Nazi Germany. I can empathize with everybody involved. I can start to make these difficult, thinking that's required to understand our little planet Earth.
Well, there is research to back up what you said. There's research that's consistent with your intuition there. That there's research that shows that being kind to other people, doing something nice for someone else, is like making a deposit
Yeah.
to some extent. Because I think making a deposit not only in their body budgets but also in yours. Like, people feel good when they do good things for other people. We are social animals. We regulate each other's nervous systems for better and for worse, right? The best thing for a human nervous system is another human. And the worst thing for a human nervous system is another human. So you decide. Do you want to be somebody who makes people feel who makes people feel better, or do you want to be somebody who causes people pain? And we are more responsible for one another than we might like or than we might want. But remember what we said about social reality, social reality. So there are lots of different cultural norms about independence or collective nature of people. But the fact is, we have socially dependent nervous systems. We evolved that way as a species. And in this country, we prize individual rights and freedoms. And that is a dilemma that we have to grapple with. And we have to do it in a way, if we're going to be productive about it, we have to do it in a way that requires engaging with each other, and which is what I understand the founding members of this country intended.